Hello, good evening and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this very special first launch of our In Conversation series. I'm Dan Harding, I'm Head of Music Performance here at the University of Kent, and I'm very pleased that we're able to bring our Zoom for Thought podcast series, which we were running last term, to a small screen near you, for this In Conversation strand, which will be my inviting various luminaries from the world of music into the studio to share some of their experience and to talk with us about what it's like working in the industry, the impact of last year, and so on. So I'm very excited to launch our first episode with soprano superstar Rachel Nicholls. Rachel's career has taken her to concert halls and opera stages all around the world, but it's particularly for her roles in Wagner opera that she has been attracting rave reviews for 7 or 8 years. And tonight I'm hoping that she's going to share some of her experience with her, including just before we came on air, we were talking about the rather alarming idea of being dropped in the deep end and suddenly finding yourself not a member of the audience, but actually a member of the production and performing on stage. So from your various homes and rooms around the country, please give a very warm welcome, albeit that we won't hear it, but I'm sure it will still be enthusiastic, to my guest this evening, Rachel Nicholls. Rachel, welcome.
Hi.
Nice to see you. So yes, just before we came on air, I was asking you, sort of reading around in preparing for this evening, it struck me that there's several instances where you've suddenly found yourself at rather short notice, not just watching it, but actually performing too. Is this a career strand, sort of last minute sopranos.com?
Yeah, I think at the beginning of my career, I made a bit of a feature of always being second choice for everything. So I, for many years, would replace other more famous sopranos on long tours of Bach cantatas and passions and things. I was Hanna Blazikova a number of times. I was Carolyn Sampson a few times. I was Joanne Lunn. I don't think I ever got to be Emma Kirkby, but it was always a sort of thing that I aspired to do. And it's lovely being second choice because, I mean, sometimes you actually get enough notice to learn the music. On other occasions, it's slightly more hair raising because you have to sort of sight read from memory in the concert. And I sort of developed a bit of a reputation for being able to stand there, never having seen the music before, and get it right, and hopefully do a little bit more than that as well. So I did do a lot of jumping in at the beginning of my career, but those jump-ins became more and more dramatic. There were 2 occasions where I had to jump in at very short notice at the St Endelian Festival. The first time was to sight read the role of Jennifer in Tippett's A Midsummer Marriage in the concert. Now that I just can't even imagine how frightened I was now. I look back and I mean, it was, I can't remember anything about it at all. I was completely glued to the music because it's incredibly complicated and difficult. And I was surrounded by all of these really well-known people. You know, Roderick Williams was in it. And I was being Sally Matthews. She'd got a terrible cold and had to go home. And so I did that. I think a couple of years later, the same thing happened with the Rake's Progress, and I had to sight read Anne Truelove, which wasn't quite as hair-raising in terms of how difficult it was, but it was still quite scary. But I think the time which sort of trumps all of those was when I had to go on halfway through the opera, when I was in Turin, and I was double cast with a lovely very famous Wagnerian singer called Ricarda Merbeth. And we had 3 performances each, and I had done my 3 performances, and Ricarda was doing her final performance. And for her other 2 performances, she hadn't been feeling on top form. And she had asked me to be in the theatre. And I had, of course, agreed because we were understudying each other. So I'd been in the theatre, I had a lot of music to learn. And for the 3rd performance, I didn't hear anything at all. And she was on very good form. And so I just happened to mention to the stage door when I signed into the theatre, I'm going to be in room 12. I'm working on Electra, and I've booked a room with a piano, so I'm going to be learning my music. Just to be friendly, really, to the stage door people. And I had the tannoy on, and I listened to the overture, and I listened to Ricarda start singing, and she sounded absolutely fantastic. So I turned the tannoy off, and I sat there learning Electra, which was the next thing I was booked to do in Basel. And then about 15 minutes into the opera, they came and found me, and they said, all is not well with Ricarda, can you come? And I put the tannoy back on, and I could hear that she was singing half voice. Mm-hmm. So I went up to the stage, and they were panicking. Everybody was panicking because Ricarda was clearly quite distressed. And Michel Breit, my very, very lovely friend, who usually is Brangainer when I'm Isolde in all sorts of different places, came off the stage and said, Ricarda has a problem. We need to do something. And she fetched Ricarda some water and took it to her on stage. But by that stage, Ricarda had started to sing down the octave. So she was clearly in a lot of discomfort and looking very, very, very worried. So I said, look, I need a black jacket. And I grabbed the black jacket from the assistant conductor. I fortunately was wearing black jeans and a black T-shirt, and I put the black jacket on, and I walked to the side of the stage where Ricarda could see me, and she beckoned me onto the stage. And I said, do you want me to start singing really loud? And she nodded and was frantically nodding. So I walked out onto the stage and started to sing. And then she acted the rest of Act 1, and then I took over in Act 2. But I had to get her permission, because can you imagine how awful it would have been if I'd have just walked on stage and started singing and she didn't want me to start singing? It was very, very difficult, because it was left up to us to sort it out. Anyway. I got into costume for Act 2 and finished the opera. And when I got back to my apartment, she had left me a beautiful bunch of flowers and a box of chocolates and a card saying thank you. She'd had a terrible attack of acid reflux, and it had just made her voice just go like that. Oh, so lovely Ricarda. I hope we get to work together again, because she owes me one.
But I mean, having stepping up at the last minute to do Stravinsky and particularly Tippett's Midsummer Marriage, that's not sort of something straightforward, is it? The rhythmic complexity and so on of that kind of music.
No, I think it required two things. One is that I have perfect pitch, which they say, how do you know when someone has perfect pitch? And the answer to that is they will tell you 5 minutes after.
That's true.
It's been both a blessing and a curse over the years, but it's extremely useful for sight. So I think that was sort of necessary. And the other thing was, certainly at the beginning of my career, I was absolutely fearless, really. I would just say yes to anything and just get on with it and then worry about it afterwards. I'm not like that anymore. I think I've slightly lost my bottle, I have to say. And when I signed with my current agent, Jonathan, I said, could I do a few fewer jump-ins, please? And he said, yes. He said, we'll get you your own work. It's fine. So I don't do so much of it as I used to. Let's put it that way. But and in fact, I had a lovely, lovely conversation with Masaki Suzuki, for whom I had been second choice for about a decade. And we did have a very lovely, honest conversation about it. And he said, I will give you your own projects because you have rescued my project so many times. So, he's one of my very favorite people in the world. He's wonderful. But, I've never claimed to be the world-class person that the original choice was. That's the thing. I'm a very good substitute, though. So,
But I mean, you've attracted rave reviews in your own right, haven't you, for doing the role of Isolde particularly, and you've done the complete ring cycle with Longborough, haven't you? Because that's not something that readily, it's a particular, as I think you said before, it's something that not very many people do. So it must be quite something to have done a complete cycle.
Volunteer for the jobs that nobody else wants to do. It's a very, very good career strategy. So, yes, there are about probably 8 people in the world who sing Electra. So therefore, there's quite a good hit rate in terms of being booked, which is really, really good. If you're Susanna in The Marriage of Figaro, there are just millions of sopranos.
Right.
I'm lucky that I have the prerequisites for singing Wagner, which are that I can sing for a very, very, very long time, very, very loudly without getting tired. Just, well, it's a combination of things, but ultimately, I'm just very, very lucky. My voice is very robust and resilient, and I have a lot of physical stamina.
But that presumably is also as a result of years of practice and training and developing the technique and the support.
That's also true, but I try not to take all the credit for it because a lot of it really is just luck and biology. But yeah, Wagner is brilliant, and it's one of those things that you're told as a young singer is very dangerous. Wagner is very dangerous. Wagner wrecks people's voices, and it's very difficult to ever get anybody to really, put their head on the block and say, now you are ready to do it. So it wasn't even really on my radar until I went to audition for Longborough Festival Opera. And my career up till then had been primarily as a Baroque specialist. I sort of had two things on the go. So I had my Baroque singing, which was very, very straight. Ich will dein Kreuz versetzen, where I would sort of do an impression of the lighter and more beautifully voiced people that I was replacing at short notice, mainly.
Right.
Singing with very little vibrato and effectively sort of singing from here up and not really engaging all of the big guns, as I would say.
Yep.
On the side, I was developing my proper opera voice. I did a lot of little roles at Covent Garden when I first left music college, and I'd been told by Peter Cattaner, the casting director, now you need to go and do bigger roles with smaller companies. And he sort of, he said, you will be a dramatic soprano, but you're not ready to do that yet. So go off and do something else, for a bit. So I did this pretend Baroque singing. I call it pretend Baroque singing. I mean, it wasn't my full voice. It was a manufactured voice that I was using. Meanwhile, I was developing my other voice, but it wasn't quite right for anything. It was too heavy to be Susanna. It was actually too heavy to be the Countess in The Marriage of Figaro. Did Fiordiligi a few times. That worked quite well, but I couldn't sing high enough to sing a lot of the other dramatic coloratura roles. So I ended up doing a lot of contemporary music, which I really, really enjoyed because contemporary music is great. You get to work with the composers. It's very, very exciting. The productions tend to be thrilling. And I loved doing it. It's hard music, so I found it really challenging. And I love hard things. So that was great. And my former agent, James, who is wonderful, and really took my career from being a little bit at it's a bit of a standstill, really, because once you're not the young, cheap thing straight out of music college, most people have a bit of a slump. And James took me out of my slump and totally rebuilt my career. And he's the person who got me started with Wagner, really, and I will always be very, very grateful to him for that. He suggested I audition for Helmwege in the Longborough production of The Ring. And I looked at it, and Helmwege sings the battle cry that Brünnhilde sings. She's the highest Valkyrie. And I enjoyed singing that. And I went and I sang that. And instead of saying, thank you very much, the conductor said, what else have you got? So I sang all of the things in my bag. And then he got his scores out and he said, could you just sing this? Could you sing this? Could you sing this? And I was in there for about an hour. And then he offered me the job on the spot. Now, that had never happened before. Because it was always, oh, that voice is a bit metallic, that voice is a bit brassy, that voice is a bit edgy, it's not quite right, it's not beautiful enough. And all of a sudden, somebody was being enthusiastic about all of those qualities in my sound, which was lovely. And so then I was very lucky because I was put in touch with Dame Anne Evans, who agreed to teach me, and she's been my mentor ever since. And we've worked together on all of the roles that I now perform. Which has been wonderful. But I started dipping my toe in the Wagnerian waters when I was 34. And it took until I was nearly 40 to really establish a reputation for singing Wagner. And then that partly came about because they hadn't got a Brünnhilde. for Götterdämmerung at Longborough. So I did Helmwege in the Walküre, then they did Siegfried the following year, and then it was time for Götterdämmerung, and they didn't have a Brünnhilde. And I just was absolutely stubborn, and I said, I can do it, I can do it, I want to do it, I want to do it. And then eventually they couldn't find anybody else, so they sort of went, oh, all right, you can do it. I worked very, very hard on it, and when I actually started highlighting my score for Götterdämmerung, and the highlighter ran out, and I had to get another highlighter because there's just I did have a moment of, oh no, what have I done? But I got, instead of, I spent about a day panicking, and then thought I could have spent that day actually learning it instead. So I then started learning it, and then it's like anything else. It's singing Wagner. It goes on for longer, and there's more to learn, and there's more to remember. But you start at the beginning, and you learn that bit, and then you learn the next bit. And if you're me, you have a little notebook with all of the entries that you have to sing color coded and with a number, so that you can count them off as you're memorizing. Go, right, this is scene 4, and this is number 27B. I need to remember in this to sing der instead of das. And the level of stationary fetishizing that I have. I have lots of books with lots of things and lots of dividers and lots of colors of things, and I find that very helpful. And I learnt it while then they booked me to do the full cycles the same year as I did Fidelio for the first time and Zenta for the first time. So that was quite busy in terms of learning, and I never ever want another year like that.
Because I think one of the things that I think you've said before is that nobody tells you that you're ready to sing Wagner. That's something that you have to dare to try for yourself. Is that what it was? That was your moment of daring to try.
But there's a lot of things people tell you not to do, or won't tell you that you're ready to do. And for example, the standard wisdom in the way that one would sing Susanna before one would sing the Countess, the standard wisdom is that one would sing Chrysothemis in Electra before tackling Electra. Electra is it's one of the 2 most vocally demanding roles in the soprano repertoire. The other one is Turandot, which I haven't sung. I tend to steer clear of Italian rep. My voice isn't that well suited to it. Italian dramatic sopranos, very different sound to Germanic dramatic sopranos, and my sound is particularly direct, not that much vibrato in it, and that seems to be, and it's slightly lower set, and that tends to be more suited to Germanic repertoire. So that's what I've specialized in. Electra and Chrysothemis. Eric Nielsen came to hear me another jump in when I jumped in at the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées in Paris. At that time, I had about 3 weeks' notice, so that was okay. And it was a beautiful production for Pierre Audi, and then I subsequently also sang that in Rome with Daniele Gatti conducting, who is a wonderful, wonderful conductor. And Eric Nielsen, who was doing the Electra in Basel, came out to watch, and he said to me, I would like you for this production, I want you to look at both of the roles and get back to me as to which one you want to sing. Now, that's an enormously flattering and lovely thing to happen. To be genuinely, you can be in the opera, choose which role you want. It's a dream come true. And everybody said, you should sing Chrysothemis first. You should sing Chrysothemis first. And I tried. I worked on it for about 8 weeks. And at the end of those 8 weeks, my husband said, still sounds really rancid, Rachel. I was like, yeah, I know. Sounds really, really rancid. And it just sits too high, just too high for my voice. So I thought, I'm not going to be able to do this. And then I thought, well, I will look at Electra. I will look at Electra because he asked me to look at both the roles, and I'm going to look at both the roles before I turn down this project. And within 2 days, I knew. It was like putting on a pair of gloves that fitted absolutely perfectly. And for me, singing Chrysothemis would have been career suicide and vocal suicide. It would have been a complete disaster. And singing Electra is not dangerous. There we go. It just goes to show that in many, many ways, your own voice best and your own capabilities best. And what might be right for everybody else might not be right for you. So that's why I say, when you're ready to sing this stuff. and you need to try it. And what it might not be very tiring, it might be.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So I'm blessed with a lot of lovely dramatic sopranos coming to me for coaching and lessons now. And, you know, I try to be positive and encouraging and say, yes, I think you are ready to fly with this now. And try not to be too always on the side of extreme caution in terms of thinking this music is dangerous. Because one thing I do know is that with a big voice, holding it back into unsuitably light repertoire can be just as dangerous as letting the beast out of the cage.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. And I think here we have a photo from your singing.
Yes.
In Electra. Now, talk us through this. This image looks frightening, wonderful but frightening.
We have dead animals hanging from the ceiling. They are providing Clytemnestra with her daily dose of blood transfusion.
Right.
This is you can see the walls are coloured an attractive shade of red. At the end of the opera, we have 300 litres of fake blood pouring down those walls. The walls on the floor are made out of plastic. And it is a child's bedroom within Agamemnon's bathtub with all of the blood still in it. This is David Bush's production of Electra, and it is the most viscerally thrilling thing I have ever been in. It's like a horror movie. At one point in the production, I grab a heart from one of the dead animals and eat it and let all of the blood fall down my face. I have my hands in buckets of blood. I chuck it about. I get a pair of secateurs and slash my leg with it. It's just absolutely incredible. And I was not the first person to do the role in this production. There had been 2 previous Electras, but I was very lucky because when you do a revival, you don't always get to work with the original director. Mm-hmm. But David came to work with us. He spent 3 weeks in Basel with our cast, and he was so open to new things and to changing things. And I had a very different physicality naturally to the 2 Electras that had preceded me. I'm much smaller, and I'm quite boingy on stage, quite jumpy. And I envisaged, because of the set, I had started to create my Electra as a sort of damaged 8-year-old child, which really appealed to David. And so my Electra was a lot younger in terms of physicality than the previous people's Electras had been. And as a result of that, we changed quite a lot of things about the costume. We changed quite a lot of the action, and we got more and more extreme in terms of how horrific we were prepared to go with this production. And David would give me homework. So he would say, right, tonight I want you to watch, and he would list 3 horrible horror films that were available on Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever. And I took my dog, she was a puppy still, I took my dog to Basel with me. And we would sit cuddled up on the sofa watching horrible films late into the night before Electra rehearsals. And then I would take Juno with me, and he called her the little wolf, and he let the little wolf sit under the piano for rehearsals because
and presuming you and the dog, neither you nor the dog were traumatized by the amount of horror films you were forced to sit through.
No, we loved it. It was great. It was brilliant, but it was really fun playing with like something that an opera singer would never normally get to do. I think with horror, there are a lot of really horrific things that happen in operas, but to actually be on the set of like a horror film with loads of props and blood and stuff was really, really exciting. It was like being in a playground for me, because it got me really, really get very, very into the role. And there was nothing that was taboo. So I could do literally anything I wanted. It was incredible. Had a to play with. It was fabulous.
Because you've contemporary music is one of the many strings that you have to your bow, and so you were saying before how you enjoyed crazy, the challenge of modern music and what fun it is. It must be you've actually had a role written for you as well, haven't you? That must have been quite something.
It was incredible. So Nicola Lefanu wrote a piece for me called "The Crimson Bird," which is it's kind of a concerto for soprano and orchestra. And
wow.
I mean, she first heard me at Longborough, and we worked together at York University at the same time briefly. And Nicola then came to everything I sang for years in preparation for writing this piece. And dare I say it, it was a bit collaborative. So she would write something and she would send it to me, and she asked me to feed back to her about what worked and what was difficult. And I feel like I have a little bit of input into that piece. It was such an honor for that to happen, because for a composer to be so open-minded about what the singer wanted to do is it's just an incredible experience. And it's the most exciting thing I've ever sung, I think. And the fact that it was written for my voice, she knows exactly where my strengths and my weaknesses are. She knows where the most powerful bits of my voice are and where it's easy for me to get text across and where it isn't. And for all contemporary music can be quite unforgiving to sing, it was one of the most lovely vocal experiences ever, because it was written for me. So it was, again, putting on the gloves.
And that's quite refreshing to hear, because most people think of contemporary vocal music and contemporary opera as being sort of challenging and deliberately sort of antagonistic and very inorganic writing, and almost deliberately trying to break the ability to sing traditional melodic lines or something. And actually to hear that that's not the case, and it is about things that are melodic and written sort of intrinsically for particular voices, that's quite reassuring as a music buff to hear that that's the case.
I think it's immensely exciting, the idea of singing something for the first time, or not even for the first time, but if the composer is still alive. I think that's an incredible gift to be given, to be able to do that. But I also think that contemporary music gives us a huge opportunity to explore unusual colours and to maybe use our voices in more unconventional ways. And I find that very exciting as well, because I'm someone who believes that any sound you can produce that doesn't actually hurt is fair game. And all of a sudden we're freed from the necessity always to make a beautiful sound. Sometimes we want a thrilling sound or an exciting sound or an edgy sound or even an ugly sound. And there's much more scope in contemporary music for exploring all of those things.
Yes, absolutely. Because one of the things that Dame Anne Evans says is that Wagner should be sung like it's Mozart and something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there were two traditions that developed about Wagnerian singing. After Wagner died, Cosima Wagner was in charge at Bayreuth and in Wagner's theatre. And Cosima Wagner was absolutely of the opinion that the text was, if not more important, but certainly as important as the music. And she encouraged the singers at Bayreuth to sing in an extremely declamatory way. And this thing called the Bayreuth Bark developed, which meant making the text clear almost at the expense of the beauty of tone and the beauty of the music. Whereas everywhere that wasn't Bayreuth, it was a very different style of singing Wagner that was happening, because you had singers that had been trained in the bel canto tradition singing the Wagnerian roles and singing them very beautifully and not doing the text in quite the same way. And I think it nowadays the two traditions have kind of merged, and what we end up with in the very, very world-class world of Wagner, in the very with these incredible singers that I've been fortunate enough to work with, you listen to these people, and yes, their text is tremendously clear, and there is an enormous amount of energy in all of their consonants, but actually it's not about shouting, it's about focus, and it's about control, and it's about the beauty of the musical line. So I think wonderfully these two traditions have now merged, and we get all of the color in the text that Cosima Wagner would have wanted, but we have singers who ideally are able to manage these epic roles within what they can sing comfortably, which means that they can then make a beautiful sound too. So when I take on a role like Isolde, in my paint box, I'll get rid of the really ugly sounds for a minute that I only use for contemporary music. But all of the other ones, I would hope that I would use, even the ones that I used to manufacture for my Baroque singing. There are a couple of moments in Tristan. There's certainly a few moments in Götterdämmerung in the immolation scene where I will choose to sing absolutely straight with no vibrato at all, very, very softly, because I feel that that's right for that particular bit of text, for that particular emotion that I want to convey. So yes, Wagner can be sung like Mozart. It should be within what the singer can do rather than outside what the singer can do.
And this is you singing in Götterdämmerung, is that right?
This was my first Brünnhilde in Götterdämmerung. Yes, I'm warding off the falsche Gunther with the ring, is what I'm doing there. The costumes were fabulous, made on a shoestring, designed by Kjell Torreset, who is an artist, and it was a wonderful experience working with him. He has an amazing eye, and yeah, it's. I look back on that with such enormous affection. The whole of the Longborough experience, it launched my Wagnerian career, but working for Longborough is like working for a family. It's just wonderful.
Oh, lovely. And so before, just at the beginning of last year, before everything arrived and we went through last year, you were singing out in Frankfurt. Is that right?
I was singing Isolde in a beautiful production in Frankfurt, and I was very, very lucky because the performances were scheduled in 2 lumps. So we had January, February, and then we had more performances planned for June and July. And I managed to do the first half of the performances before everything stopped. Right. So it would have been so heartbreaking to work for 8 weeks on a new production and then not to get to do it. And we were challenged during the rehearsal period. Vincent Wolfsteiner, who is a wonderful, wonderful Tristan, was very ill towards the end of the rehearsal period, and he had to miss a couple of performances. The dress rehearsal I did with the assistant director walking Tristan and somebody else singing from the side, but I don't know. There is often a cut done in Act 2 of Tristan and Isolde, and the replacement Tristan had only done the cut version, which meant we had to change the production because he didn't know the music in the middle. And then there were twice I did it with different Tristans who were not Vincent, and I had to keep remember, right, we do the cut in this one, we do not do the cut in this one, because it's me it's my bit, I have to come in with the first entry after the cut, so it's really important that I don't miss it. But we managed, and yeah, as I say, I was very, very lucky to be able to do that production that we'd worked so hard on before everything ground to halt. Of course, the second half of the project was cancelled, which is very, very sad. But I hope that Vincent and I get to sing it again one day because he's wonderful.
Was there a moment where you thought actually you might be stuck out in Frankfurt and unable to get back home, or were you able to get back home fairly easily?
I was, but I think the third performance, my plane to Frankfurt was diverted to Stuttgart, and nobody would say why, because they said if they said that Frankfurt airport was shut and we were diverting to Stuttgart, and then we stayed on the plane for about an hour and a half in Stuttgart and then flew back to Frankfurt once we'd refueled. And it turned out, we found out the next day, that the reason the airport was shut was that the Germans who'd been stranded in Wuhan were being flown back to Frankfurt. And so the airport closed in terms of safety to let them get through the security controls with nobody else there. So that's why. And at that point, I thought, it's coming closer. This thing is going to get us too. And it did. Yeah, so I was very lucky. My travel was not disrupted. I got home safely, and then I had one other performance, which was a performance of Act 2 of Fidelio with the Halle, which went ahead before everything stopped, and that was that. And then the only performance I did during lockdown was Fidelio again, for Opera North. We managed to do a live stream just before Christmas, which was incredible.
Oh, lovely.
So, yeah, so I've been lucky with my Fidelios this year.
and whilst all kind of live performances and rehearsals are on hold, you're now concentrating on the teaching you're doing at Huddersfield.
Absolutely. I'm head of singing at Huddersfield University, and I've got five third years finishing their undergraduate degree. I've got one master's student, a lovely bass baritone, and I've got 5 new first years. And we're trying to make this year as good for them as we can. So we managed some in-person teaching in the first term. My husband managed to put on a staged opera with 3 separate groups of 6 students. Nobody transmitted COVID to anybody else during that, which is very, very good news.
A staged production. How on earth did that happen then?
Well, we have a very small group of people in a very big space. We have very, very rigorous health and safety protocols, which everybody followed. And the students were amazing, and they didn't indulge in any risky activities when they were being unsupervised. So well done, the students. Incredible.
And is this the one that involved the puppetry you mentioned?
So, Andrew wanted to include the pop students as well as the classical students. So he put together a kind of eclectic version of Monteverdi's Orfeo. And the way he did it was that whoever was holding the Orfeo puppet on the drumsticks, so that nobody actually had to touch a thing that somebody else had touched. So everybody had their drumsticks, which were 1 meter long, very long drumsticks. Whoever was holding the puppet was Orfeo, is how it worked. And I'm so pleased we were able to give that experience to the students, because it meant they did some practical opera singing. And yes, this term, everyone is submitting video recitals. They're working very hard on those at the moment. I get sent a video about every 5 minutes to look at and say, no, do it again. It's a C in bar 47, not a D.
And I think that's
smile.
And that's the thing about the way that we've all been forced to work this year, is that we had to find ways of continuing to be creative, continuing to work and perform and learn and so on, in spite of the fact that we can't do it in the way that we traditionally would. And it sounds as though you've very creatively found ways in which to be able to do that.
I'm very pleasantly surprised by how much I have enjoyed online teaching. In fact, I'm normally a visiting professor at the Royal Scottish Conservatoire, and I normally visit 3 times a year. And obviously all of that was put on hold. And I contacted them at the beginning of this term, and I said, I think I can still visit. I can just visit on Zoom instead. And so we've planned, I've got now 34 Zoom sessions with students from the Royal Scottish Conservatoire, which I'm very much looking forward to.
Yeah.
So it will be different, because normally I have a pianist who plays for me for their sessions, often a student rep, which is fantastic, or my lovely friend Mike Bawtry sometimes plays. And so obviously the students won't be apart from me, 2 seconds behind on the electric piano.
Yeah. I mean, it's surmounting those obstacles, isn't it? And finding ways to keep going at it. Are there any ways?
We can still do really valuable work, I think, is what has come out of it. And actually, online learning is different, but it's not necessarily worse. Obviously, it will be lovely to be back in a room with actual people and actual instruments, and it will be wonderful. And I can't wait for that to happen. But there are some aspects of the online teaching that I'm going to continue to use. Certainly things that seemed impossible while I was away internationally singing and had to, put my students in the care of somebody else. Now we have ways of doing things online that work. So I'm much more open to the idea of lessons on Zoom while I'm away, which will be great. A combination of different things means a lot more is possible. I have a student in Oman now. That would never have been possible before.
Yeah. It's interesting that in some ways the reach or the engagement that you can have is much wider through being able to sort of teach people in different time zones who you wouldn't otherwise have been able to work with in person and so on. It's interesting that there are creative ways that people have found that they are looking forward to carrying on when assuming everything goes back to some semblance of normality. It's quite reassuring that there are some elements that people have gone, actually I've identified that as something that really works, and I'm going to carry on doing that.
And certainly in terms of practical teaching, I realise quite how much I am dependent and my students are dependent on the piano. So I play the piano. I was a pianist before I was a singer. And it's lovely when I'm at the Royal Scottish that I have somebody playing for me because I don't have to do it then. But with my own students, I've always played their piano accompaniments. And it means we're totally dependent on the piano. And it's been brilliant for them not to have that. They've all had to get much better at singing in tune without a piano and all sorts of other things. And it's given us a chance to work on things in more detail, actually. We can't sing through things quite so successfully, but we can do lots of very detailed work on our Italian pronunciation and things like that.
Yes, so, the smaller elements, the smaller building blocks of putting things together. I mean, one of the lovely things that I read that you'd said was that how teaching informs your performing. Teaching isn't something that you do separately from your performing career. The two of them inform each other.
Definitely. I started teaching while I was actually at university. And when I left university, I became a singing Perry in 4 different schools while I was having my gap year before going to music college. And my qualifications for the job were that I could play the piano and I had a car.
Right.
My lovely friend Ian Smith, who is a wonderful conductor, who was at that time the county music advisor for Bedfordshire, trusted me enough to let me be a singing teacher for Bedfordshire County Council. And I never looked back. I loved it from the minute I started doing it, and I kept it going. It helped me support myself while I was a student, and then over my career, there have been times when I've needed to teach for the money and sometimes when I've only ever done it for pleasure. And this year, before COVID hit, in September, I went to my boss at Huddersfield University and I said, the things in my diary are taking me away from the university too much now, and I really feel the time has come that I should be a visitor, not a permanent member of staff, and I don't feel that I should be in charge of the department anymore. So I'm going to write you my resignation letter. And he said that was very sad, but he quite understood, and he was surprised that I'd managed to keep it going for as long as I had. And then I went home and I didn't sleep properly for 2 weeks because I felt so awful about leaving, but also I just instinctively had this feeling that it was not the right thing for me. And I thought about it and I looked at the dates again, and I did a deal with my husband about him covering some of my teaching for me with instructions, because I'm not very good at leaving things to other people. A little bit of a control freak. You can teach things, but only if you do exactly what I say in each of the lessons. And Andrew was lovely about it. And, you know, we historically, we've always covered for each other. If one of us is ill, for example, the other person will go and do the teaching. And when Andrew had to self-isolate twice because of people coming into contact, I did his teaching for him at Huddersfield. I didn't get zapped for self-isolating during the in-person teaching, but poor Andrew got done twice. So yes, I looked at the dates again, and I went to Philip and said, I don't really want to leave. Can I unresign, please? And he fortunately said yes. So. At the time, it was an enormous relief that I felt I'd done the right thing for me, because I would miss the teaching so much. I now, and it now turns out that I am a full-time singing teacher. So it couldn't have worked out better in a strange sort of way. And thank goodness I didn't actually go through with resigning, because that would have been dreadful. It's always been. I suffer very badly from imposter syndrome, and it's never seemed quite reasonable that I should make all of my living from dressing up in silly clothes and shrieking. You know, it's sort of doing my hobby for my job, and something about it has always just seemed a little bit like not real life. And I personally am much happier when I have at least one of my feet on the ground. And I've always said to all of my students, and always said all along to people who've asked my advice about careers, it's always good to have your eggs in more than one basket. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that there can be a global pandemic, which means that there is no singing. And through no fault of your own, it's not your own terrible singing or your own terrible career decisions or breaking your voice singing Electra too many times, you can be left with absolutely no performing income. And, you know, the worst case scenario can actually happen. And now it has, it's a bit of a relief in a funny sort of way, because, you know, there we go. It was worth all of those times when I've been a bit too busy and trying to fit my teaching in around the performing and not had quite time to learn my music. And it's all been a bit stressful. It's been worth it for the security that I now have, which is an amazing thing. But more than that, I feel that my performing would suffer if I didn't also teach. I think I've learned more about singing from teaching it to other people than I have from any singing teacher that I've been to myself. And also the thing that is so seductive about contemporary music, which is the freedom to make sound in a very unconstrained way. There's something amazing about making music with other people's voices and being a facilitator that's actually quite magical. And I think I would totally miss that if I didn't have it in my life.
I think it's the great thing about teaching is that it forces you to externalize and think about what it is that you're doing and that you want to be able to then explain it to someone so that they can do it too. And it's that ability to, or that demand that teaching makes for you to consider what you're doing in order to be able to explain it to somebody else. That gives you that wonderful perspective on what it is that you're doing yourself. And you never quite things for granted, do you? Because you're always aware of the effort that having to be made for you to do it and then pass it on.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's amazingly informative, and I hope it works the other way around as well, in that, I mean, obviously there's the directing where, you know, I am teaching a wonderful young Wagnerian, Annie Loveday-Hill, and we've been working on Isolde. I've sung Isolde in 14 different productions of Tristan. So I feel I can say to her, well, it's better if you breathe here because the orchestra does this. I mean, that's more coaching than teaching, really. But there's also all of the indirect things, which are that not only have I been fortunate enough to sing some of these amazing roles myself, but I've stood next to Placido Domingo on stage. You know, I've heard the very best singers in the world from a distance of less than a meter. So I think that is incredibly valuable for my students. You know, I might not be able to make those sounds myself, but I can recognize them if one of my students makes one. Yeah, do that one. That's what he's doing.
It's also, I guess, that whole performing tradition that you've been involved with through doing, 14 productions of Tristan and having that real working knowledge, not just of singing the role, but of performing the role and the physicality of bringing it on stage and interacting and all the, as you were saying earlier, your obsession with stationery and marking scores up, the very nitty gritty nuts and bolts of preparing for these things. These are the things that presumably you're able to pass on that someone without your wealth of experience wouldn't necessarily be able to share in the same way.
I hope so. I'm also a complete technique junkie. And the reason for that is that I have to be able to deliver even when I'm having a bad day. Even sometimes, I mean, there was the time when I had to sing Electra with laryngitis because my understudy was sicker than I was. Oh. And it was a question of, we will have to cancel the show or you have to try and sing. And I, so I have various different race plans for Electra, like you would have a race plan for a marathon. I have Electra on a good day, I have Electra on a medium day, a bad day, and when I've got laryngitis. And this is how I sing Electra on these different days. But that absolute reliance on my own instrument means that I understand the importance of being able to produce voice on demand. And that is what I try to give my students too. This, not only the nuts and bolts of how the voice works and the techniques that are useful for making the noises, but also to emphasize how important it is to be able to rely on it. And you can't always be having a good day.
Yeah. Yes.
Pragmatic,
Well, especially if as seems to have happened before, where you suddenly find yourself flung in at the last minute, where there was one moment where you were saying earlier before we came on air that you had less rehearsal time than the duration of the entire performance.
Yes, so that was, I mean, it was a planned performance. I did know I was going to have to do it, but what I didn't know was that I was going to, it was an unfortunate a series of events, I suppose, but one of them involved the assistant director's migraine, which cancelled one of my 2 rehearsals. So I ended up having less than 2 hours to rehearse an opera that lasts for 5 hours. So that was not ideal, really. I got to Act 3, and this was in my favourite place to work, which is Karlsruhe, at the Badische Staatsoper, and I have very, very good friends and colleagues there. I've never been Fest. I've never been a member of their ensemble, but I've worked there more than I've worked anywhere else. And all of my friends were in it as the Valkyries, which was great. And Barbara and Christina, who were possibly in Karlsruhe, literally grabbed a hand each and moved me around the stage saying, "Don't go on that bit, it moves up. Don't go on that bit, it moves down. You'll kill yourself if you stand on that bit, stand there."
Gosh.
And without them, I don't know what I would have done. They were just the loveliest colleagues ever. And it just goes to show how generous people can be, because I've shared roles with both Barbara and Christina, and theoretically we could be rivals for the same parts, and so generous is Barbara that when I got the chance to do Isolde at the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées in Paris, which we talked about earlier, there was a scheduled performance of Macbeth, and Barbara was the other Lady Macbeth, and it would have meant travelling to Karlsruhe in between 2 performances of Isolde to sing Lady Macbeth. The 2 do not go very well together vocally. Lady Macbeth sits a lot higher. And Barbara, very generously, she said, "I will swap." She gave me one of her performances later in the year and she took on mine. Now, that's incredible support from a colleague, not even in the same opera house. And the generosity of these colleagues to keep me safe on stage, you know, when theoretically either of them could have been standing there thinking, I wish I was singing that role. And, you know, they're incredible people. And the more I work in this business, the more I realize there are far more angels than the alternative.
and that's very lovely to hear, because normally the sort of you read about kind of rivalry and, you know, the sort of animosity that exists, but actually it's nice for someone to come forward and say, actually that's not necessarily your experience of it, and actually the opposite of that is true. People are kind to one another.
People are very kind to one another, and being a good colleague is the best thing you can be. And I have to say, I've never experienced any of the bitchiness that you hear about. Actually, it's always been a joy. All of the colleagues that I've worked with, well, with the exception of possibly a couple of tenors, but probably the least said the better. I have a list that I would prefer not to sing with again.
Okay. The list will be appearing online after the show.
No, it's bad behavior that I've witnessed, and rather than really anything that's been particularly directed at me. But I don't like colleagues who are rude, and I don't like colleagues who are rude to the wardrobe staff and the makeup lady and the wig lady. There's just no excuse for bad behavior. So I don't approve.
And I think musicians are instinctively collaborative people, yes, usually, aren't they? You know, we're used to working with other people and being part of larger ensembles to make things happen. So usually you would hope that the musicians were instinctively wanting to work with people and put people at their ease in order to get the best out of them that they can.
Absolutely. And if you have been an ensemble player or an ensemble singer, and you have been really genuinely a member of a team, then I think that's an enormously good experience to bring to something where you are a soloist, because ultimately we are all on the same side, and that's important to remember. Apart from the critic, they're not on our side.
Absolutely. And that sounds like a very good point at which we should draw this evening's interview to a close. Rachel, thank you ever so much for being a very generous guest this evening, and for you know, sharing all the highs and the lows of your experiences and so on with us all. It's been a real pleasure to have you aboard this evening. Thank you so much.
The pleasure's been all mine. Thank you so much for asking me.
A pleasure. And thank you, viewers at home and all round, for joining us this evening. I'll leave you with, this is a shot from Rachel performing in an excitingly dark lit stage as part of her career. It's been a real pleasure talking to Rachel this evening. Thank you very much, everyone at home, for watching. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks' time, so do join us then. From me and from Rachel, a very good evening, and thank you for joining us.